If you listen closely, the pines in Kalispell whisper secrets when the wind snakes through their branches. That first morning, gray as stone, heavy with the silence of early winter, 8-year-old Emily Harris could have sworn she heard her father's voice carried on the icy air. But when she turned, there was only her own breath, steaming before her, and the steady crunch of boots on fresh snow. Emily had never imagined she'd live here. Just a month ago, her life was measured by school bells, her dad's goofy ranger stories, and the busy hum of a city apartment. But the accident changed everything. Her father, gone, vanished during a late autumn patrol, declared lost by the search teams. The word missing clung to her mother's voice like a cold, wet blanket. So Emily and her mom had packed up what was left of their lives and moved north to her grandparents' place, tucked against the edge of the Flathead National Forest. Now, as she wandered past the tree line that bordered her grandparents' yard, Emily hugged her arms tight against the wind. Pines stretched overhead, their needles trembling, the world muffled under a soft layer of snow. The sky hung low, a sheet of iron. She stopped, listening. Something about these woods made her heart thud with both fear and longing. Her dad had always said the forest kept its own time, its own rules. She wished he were here to explain them now. That's when she heard it. A sound so soft, she nearly missed it under the sigh of the wind. A whimper. High-pitched, desperate, and so out of place it sent a shiver through her. She turned, searching, her boots leaving a wild, uneven trail behind her. There, between two old pines, half hidden by low branches, something moved. She hesitated. The warnings her mother had drilled into her echoed. Don't go too far, Emily. Don't talk to strangers. Don't touch stray animals. But the sound came again, sharper this time. Fear prickled along her skin, but something else, maybe hope, maybe stubbornness, pulled her forward. Beneath the largest pine, she found him. The German Shepherd was larger than any dog she'd seen up close, but hunger had carved shadows into his fur. His ribs stood out, each breath drawing them tight against his frame. A dirty rope was tied cruelly tight around his neck, tethering him to the tree trunk. Snow dusted his back, melting slowly into the matted fur. But his eyes, those deep, amber eyes, locked onto hers. Not wild, not angry, just waiting, as if he'd been expecting her. Emily took a shaky breath, her heartbeat booming in her ears. "Hey, it's okay," she whispered, the way she remembered her dad talking to hurt animals. She inched closer, careful, her boots sinking into the snow. "I won't hurt you." He didn't growl, didn't bark, only watched her, panting softly, his breath hanging in the air like a question. Emily reached out, fingers trembling, and touched his back. The fur was cold and tangled, but the dog didn't flinch, not even when she brushed the rope, checking the knot. Up close, she saw a raw patch where the rope had rubbed his neck. "Who did this to you?" Emily murmured. No tag, no collar, just the rope, old and stained. She glanced around, heart thudding. There were no footprints in the snow but her own. A gust of wind sent pine needles raining down, and the dog shivered. Emily shrugged off her thick scarf and looped it over his shoulders. It wasn't much, but it was all she had. 1,000 questions raced through her mind. Who left him here? Why? And why did he stare at her like he knew her? Like he was waiting for her, specifically, to come. She tried to untie the knot, but it was tight, frozen hard by the cold. She worked at it anyway, biting her lip, glancing over her shoulder for any sign of movement in the trees. Every so often, the dog would whimper again, low and hopeful. Finally, after what felt like forever, the rope came loose. The shepherd staggered, legs shaking, and for a moment Emily thought he'd run. But instead, he leaned against her, as if he'd decided she was safe. The world felt bigger suddenly, the forest darker, the silence deeper. Emily looked at the dog and realized she was responsible for him now, whether she wanted to be or not. "Let's go," she said softly, leading him toward the distant glow of her grandparents' kitchen window. The shepherd limped, but he didn't lag behind. With every step, Emily's fear faded a little, replaced by something else, a kind of fierce determination she'd never felt before. As they crossed the yard, the back door flew open. Her grandfather, Frank, stood silhouetted in the warm yellow light. "Emily, what on earth?" His voice caught when he saw the dog, eyes narrowing, mouth tightening into a line. Behind him, her mother, Sarah, appeared, her face tight with worry. "Where did you find that?" Sarah's voice was sharp, brittle as ice. Emily opened her mouth, then stopped. She didn't know how to explain what she'd felt, the pull to this place, the certainty that the dog had been waiting for her. "He was tied up," she said finally, voice barely above a whisper. "All alone. Somebody left him in the cold." Her grandfather knelt, inspecting the dog's limp and the raw spot on his neck. He let out a long, low whistle. "Looks like someone wanted rid of him." Sarah shook her head, already backing away. "We can't keep him, Emily. He could be sick. Dangerous." "He's not," Emily cut in, surprising herself. "He just needs help." The shepherd sat at her feet, pressing close. For the first time since her father's funeral, Emily felt something lift inside her, a flicker of hope, fragile but real. As the wind howled outside and the night pressed against the windows, Emily stroked the dog's fur and whispered, "It's okay. You're safe now." But in her heart, the questions lingered. Who had tied the dog there? Why did he seem to know her? And what secrets lay waiting in the silent, snowy pines? Unseen by the family, a figure moved among the shadows at the edge of the woods, boots crunching quietly in the snow, watching, waiting. Morning came heavy and silent, the sky still weighed down by thick gray clouds and the threat of more snow. Emily barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the German shepherd's tired, watchful eyes, so much like her dad's when he'd come home from a long patrol. Even now, as the first hints of daylight crept across the ceiling, she wondered if any of it had been a dream. But then came the soft shuffle at her bedroom door, a gentle, insistent pawing, and she knew it was all real. She slipped out of bed, careful not to wake her mom. The wooden floor was cold beneath her toes, but she didn't care. The shepherd sat just outside, tail thumping softly, his nose pressed to the gap under the door. He looked up when she opened it, and she couldn't help but smile. Despite his size and the faint limp in his back leg, there was a puppy-like eagerness in his eyes. "Hey, buddy," she whispered, squatting to scratch behind his ears. He leaned into her hand, groaning with pleasure. For a moment, all the heaviness in Emily's chest faded. Downstairs, the house creaked with the slow warmth of Grandpa Frank making coffee and shuffling around in his thick woolen socks. Emily tiptoed down, the shepherd padding behind her. In the kitchen, Grandpa stood at the counter, whistling an off-key tune. He turned, eyebrows shooting up when he saw Emily and the dog together. "He slept by your door all night," Frank observed, a sly grin hiding under his mustache. "Must have picked his favorite human already." Emily smiled, but her mother's disapproving voice cut in from the hallway. Sarah stood there, wrapped in her old robe, arms folded tight. She eyed the dog warily. "I don't like this, Dad," Sarah said, her voice soft but sharp. "We don't know where he's been. He could have fleas, or worse." Frank poured her a mug of coffee, his hands steady as stone. "He's just a dog, Sarah. Looks like he's been through enough." Emily found herself hugging the dog closer. "Please, Mom, can't we keep him, just until we find out where he came from?" Sarah hesitated, glancing from Emily to the shepherd and back. Frank broke the tension with a practical suggestion. "How about we take him to Doc McAllister? She can check him out for anything serious. If he's healthy, maybe he can stay, at least for a while." Emily's relief was immediate and bright. She nodded eagerly, promising to help with every chore and take responsibility for their new guest. Even Sarah seemed to soften, though she kept a watchful eye on the dog, as Emily brought out a bowl of water and some leftover chicken. He gobbled the food, then sat quietly at Emily's side, watching every movement in the room, as if learning their routines. Emily's mind spun with possibilities. She remembered the island her father had always talked about, Kodiak Island, where the wild things lived free. It seemed fitting for a dog who'd survived so much. "I want to name him Kodiak," Emily announced suddenly, surprising even herself. "Like the island. Dad always said we'd go there someday." Frank smiled, nodding with approval. "Kodiak, huh? Strong name for a strong dog." Sarah only sighed, but she didn't object. That afternoon, they bundled Kodiak into the back of the truck, wrapping him in an old quilt, and drove down Main Street to the small veterinary clinic at the edge of town. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the air, clinging to the windshield. Doc McAllister was a stout, cheerful woman with quick hands and a gentle touch. She coaxed Kodiak onto the exam table and checked him over, her face growing serious as she examined the scar around his neck and the limp in his hind leg. "He's lucky," she said at last. "Nothing broken. Just needs good food, warmth, and rest. Whoever tied him up meant for him to be found, not killed. He's chipped, but the registry doesn't list an owner. You might just be his new family." That news sparked a glimmer of hope in Emily, though Sarah still looked troubled. On the way home, Kodiak pressed his head into Emily's lap, his tail occasionally thumping as if in thanks. Back at the house, life began to shift. Kodiak followed Emily everywhere, even shadowing her to the bathroom door and curling up beside her desk when she did homework. At night, he slept outside her room, occasionally waking to patrol the hall. Grandpa Frank chuckled that he had earned his keep by scaring off a pair of nosy raccoons from the chicken coop. Despite herself, even Sarah began to soften. One morning, she caught Kodiak staring out the window at the snowy yard and found herself absently scratching behind his ears. "You miss someone too, don't you?" she whispered. Emily watched from the stairs, feeling something warm begin to thaw between her and her mother. Still, the mystery of Kodiak's past lingered. Sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, Emily wondered if her father might have met the dog somewhere, if Kodiak was another silent connection to a world she'd lost. Then came a day that changed everything. Emily was painting at the kitchen table when Kodiak, bored and energetic, bounded through the house and sent a heavy vase crashing to the floor with a swipe of his tail. Water and flowers exploded across the tiles. For a split second, Emily froze, expecting to be scolded, but when she looked up, her mother was laughing, really laughing, for the first time in months. The sound filled the kitchen, bright and unexpected, and even Grandpa Frank had to wipe a tear from his eye. Emily grinned, her heart swelling. Kodiak, oblivious, sat in the middle of the mess, wagging his tail with wild abandon. After that, it felt like the house was alive again. Emily caught herself humming as she fed Kodiak, and even Sarah put up a bowl with his name written on a piece of masking tape. Neighbors dropped by, some with old dog toys or bones, all curious about the miracle dog that had turned up in the pines. Emily always kept a close watch, noticing the way Kodiak sometimes stared out at the forest, his ears pricked, as if waiting for something or someone. But in those brief, golden moments, Emily allowed herself to hope. With Kodiak by her side, the world felt less empty, less frightening. For the first time since her father disappeared, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, there were still happy endings out there, hiding somewhere in the snow, waiting to be found. Unbeknownst to Emily, far at the edge of the woods, tire tracks marred the fresh snow, and a single, lonely cigarette butt smoldered in the cold, unnoticed. The secrets of the forest and of Kodiak's past were only beginning to unravel. For days, Kalispell lay frozen beneath a blanket of thick gray clouds. Even the birds seemed to have vanished, their songs replaced by the distant groan of wind through the pines. Emily tried to focus on homework, chores, anything, but her thoughts kept circling back to Kodiak and the way his ears twitched whenever someone mentioned her father. Sometimes, when dusk crept in and the kitchen was filled with the quiet hum of Sarah and Grandpa Frank cooking dinner, Emily caught Kodiak staring at the old family photos on the mantel, as if searching for a familiar face. It was one of those slow, heavy afternoons when Emily wandered upstairs, half searching for distraction, half drawn by the gnawing sense that something in this house held the answers she needed. The attic was a dusty kingdom of forgotten boxes and sun-faded suitcases. She climbed the narrow wooden steps, Kodiak's claws clicking behind her. Up here, everything felt suspended in time, the air cool and tinged with the scent of cedar, memories hiding in the shadowy corners. Emily brushed aside a stack of old coats and found herself facing a battered trunk painted forest green. She recognized her father's initials, still faint on the lid. Her heart thudded with excitement and longing. Hands trembling, she undid the rusted latch. The hinges groaned, and the trunk popped open to reveal a treasure trove of ranger gear. Maps, faded photographs, a compass, and at the very bottom, a well-worn notebook bound in brown leather. Kodiak sniffed at the trunk, tail wagging uncertainly. Emily wiped dust from the cover and opened the journal. Her father's handwriting, looping and steady, filled the first pages. Weather notes, trail sketches, a list of wildflowers blooming in early spring. She flipped forward, skimming the entries for something more, something personal. Near the middle of the book, her breath caught. There, tucked between a map and a dried leaf, was a sketch of a dog, broad-shouldered, dark muzzle, one ear slightly notched. Underneath, her father had written, in bold block letters, Echo 7. Emily's gaze shot to Kodiak. She glanced back at the sketch, and then at the dog sitting quietly at her feet. There was no mistaking it. Kodiak was Echo 7. But how? She ran her finger beneath the words, her eyes drifting to a hurried, slanted line at the very bottom of the page. If anything happens to me, Echo knows. A chill ran through her, mingling with the heat of excitement. She flipped ahead, searching for more. The rest of the pages held cryptic field notes, strange symbols, and half-finished sentences. Clues, maybe, or warnings. Echo, she whispered, testing the name. Kodiak perked up, head tilting to one side. A spark of recognition flashed in his eyes, as if hearing an old song. For a moment, Emily could almost feel her father in the room, watching from the shadows, urging her forward. Just then, the attic floor creaked behind her. Grandpa Frank had come looking, his hands buried deep in the pockets of his flannel shirt. He knelt beside the trunk, eyebrows rising at the sight of the notebook. "Your dad's old field journal, huh?" he said softly. He was always jotting things down, even when he was off duty. Drove your grandma crazy. Emily showed him the sketch and the inscription. Frank's face tightened, lines deepening around his eyes. He reached out and gently turned Kodiak's collar, searching for something Emily hadn't noticed before. Under the thick, dirty leather, hidden by fur and years of grime, Frank's fingers closed on a small, cold object. With a twist, he slid it free. A dusty metal tag, barely bigger than a coin, marked with the letters RFD E7. Frank stared at the tag for a long moment. Ranger field dog, Echo 7. Must have been a special unit. Your dad worked with search and rescue teams sometimes, but I never knew he trained a dog like this. Maybe it was part of some bigger job. Questions piled up in Emily's mind. Why would her father keep this a secret? Why did Kodiak, Echo 7, end up tied alone in the woods? Was he running from someone? Or was someone trying to erase his memory? Suddenly, the attic seemed smaller, the air thick with secrets. Frank put a comforting hand on her shoulder. Maybe it's time we ask around. Someone in this town must know more about Echo 7 and why your dad wrote that note. Emily hugged the notebook to her chest, feeling its weight, both literal and invisible. It wasn't just a diary. It was a map, a message, and a promise all in one. She slipped the metal tag into her pocket and glanced at Kodiak, who met her gaze with a steady, loyal calm. Later that evening, when the house was quiet and the snow began to fall again, Emily sat on her bed with Kodiak curled up at her feet. She read through the journal by flashlight, tracing each word, each sketch, as if hoping to conjure her father's voice from the darkness. She noticed patterns, repeated mentions of a place called the Old Station, strange numbers scrawled in the margins, and references to people she'd never heard of. Clyde, MJ, the Red Jacket Man. The next day, Emily showed her mother the tag and the journal. Sarah's face grew pale as she read the last message, her hands shaking. Your father, he never talked much about his work near the end, Sarah admitted quietly. But I know he was worried. He started locking his files, taking long walks after midnight, talking to people on the phone in whispers. Frank sat at the table, silent, thinking. Finally, he said, Whatever happened to your dad, I reckon this dog was part of it. We owe it to him to find out the truth. Emily nodded, the old fear in her chest replaced now by a stubborn courage. Kodiak pressed close, head resting on her knee. In that quiet, golden moment, she realized she was no longer just missing her father. She was following in his footsteps, chasing down the same mysteries that had taken him away. That night, as wind rattled the window panes and distant branches scraped the roof, Emily wrote in the journal for the first time. Her handwriting was smaller than her father's, a little shakier, but determined. If anything happens to me, she wrote, I trust Echo. He'll find the way home. Somewhere out in the darkness, beyond the attic, in the safe circle of lamplight, secrets moved among the pines, and Emily, clutching the clues left behind, was ready to follow them, no matter where they led. Night in Kalispell came early that time of year. The afternoon sun barely struggled above the pine peaks before slipping away, and the cold seemed to sharpen as dusk pressed in. Emily sat cross-legged on her bed, the journal open in her lap, Kodiak at her feet. The glow of her flashlight danced across the ceiling as she reread her father's words, hoping for a hidden message. Downstairs, her grandfather played old blues records on the crackling radio, and the house creaked as if it too missed the man whose memory lingered in every corner. Outside, snow drifted softly past the window. It was in this hush that Emily noticed Kodiak's ears suddenly prick, his body going tense beside her. He rose silently, padding to the door. For a moment, Emily hesitated. Maybe he just needed to go out. But then she remembered the fear in her father's writing, the sketch of the red jacket man, and her heart gave a nervous leap. She followed Kodiak down the hall, careful not to wake her mom, who'd finally fallen asleep on the couch. Grandpa was in the kitchen, filling the kettle. Kodiak restless again? He asked, voice low. Emily nodded, slipping on her boots. Together, they let the dog out into the yard. The cold air stung her cheeks, but Kodiak didn't stop at the porch. He trotted straight toward the tree line. Should we go after him? Emily asked, but Frank shook his head. He'll be back. He's smart, and he always checks the boundaries at night. Emily tried to believe him, but her nerves wouldn't settle. She waited on the porch, hugging herself against the cold, peering out into the shadows. The wind picked up, rattling the bare branches. Then, from somewhere just beyond the reach of the porch light, Kodiak's growl cut through the silence, low, menacing, unlike anything Emily had heard before. She stepped down into the snow, boots crunching. Kodiak? She called, voice trembling. Grandpa was right behind her, holding a heavy flashlight. The beam swept through the trees, landing on a shape. A man, half hidden by the pines, watching the house. His jacket was bright red, the color stark against the snow. Emily froze. The man didn't move, but his presence was like a shadow crawling along the ground. Kodiak stood between Emily and the stranger, hackles up, every muscle taut and ready to spring. Frank raised the flashlight, his own voice steady but hard. Who's out there? For a moment, no one answered. The wind howled through the trees, swirling snow around their ankles. Then, as quietly as he'd appeared, the man turned and melted into the woods, boots leaving deep impressions behind. Emily's breath came out in white puffs, her hands shaking. She watched the figure disappear, the red jacket flickering between the pines until only darkness remained. Kodiak didn't move until the man was gone. Then he came to Emily's side, pressing against her leg, as if to say, "It's okay now." Frank swept the light along the ground. "Let's get inside," he said. "Lock the doors." Back in the kitchen, Emily's mind raced. "Was that—" she started, but Frank shook his head. "I don't know, but I don't like the idea of someone watching this house at night." They checked every lock, pulled every curtain. Emily sat at the kitchen table, Kodiak's head in her lap. She stroked his fur, trying to calm herself, but her thoughts were wild and tangled. She remembered the way the man had stood, almost like he was waiting, like he knew something about the dog, about her father. That night, Emily barely slept. She lay awake, listening to the house settle, the wind scrape along the roof, Kodiak's soft breathing at her bedside. Her mind replayed the moment over and over, the red jacket, the unblinking stare, the sense of being hunted even in her own home. The next morning brought no peace. Emily rose early, drawn outside by the need to see the tracks for herself. The snow had hardened overnight, preserving every detail. She followed the line of boots from the trees to where the man had stood, then back toward the forest. Along the way, she found something odd. Sticky, dark spots clinging to the prints. Pine sap, thick and fresh. She remembered her father's old ranger boots, always sticky from trudging through the forest. But why would this stranger's boots be covered in sap? Was he a ranger too, or just someone who knew how to move through these woods? Back at the chicken coop, another surprise waited. Emily noticed a small, burnt circle in the snow, right by the fence. A cigarette butt, still fresh enough that the paper hadn't melted away. She crouched to pick it up, careful not to touch it with her bare hand. No one in her family smoked. In fact, Grandpa Frank had a rule against it ever since Emily was born. She brought it inside, setting it on the kitchen table like evidence in a mystery novel. Frank examined it, brow furrowed. Someone's been here all right, and they wanted us to know it. He glanced at Emily, worry etched deep in his face. We need to be careful. If someone's after that dog, or after you, they'll try again. Sarah, overhearing from the doorway, paled at the news. She immediately started packing, muttering that they should leave town, go somewhere safer, anywhere but here. Emily pleaded with her, desperate not to leave now, not when they were finally getting close to the truth. Kodiak seemed to sense the tension, positioning himself between Emily and Sarah, blocking the doorway gently with his body. For the rest of the day, unease hovered over the house. Emily caught glimpses of movement out of the corner of her eye. A flash of color between trees, a flicker of shadow on the snow. She tried to distract herself by rereading her father's journal, searching for any mention of red jackets or strangers lurking in the woods. All she found was more worry, cryptic warnings, notes about missing equipment, and a half-finished entry about a threat near the preserve. That night, after dinner, Emily stared at the notebook, trying to puzzle out the warnings. She drew her own map of the property, marking where she'd found the cigarette, where the man had stood, and every place Kodiak seemed to react strongly. The pattern made her shiver. It was as if someone was tracing the boundaries of her life, testing for weaknesses. When the clock struck midnight, Emily crept downstairs. Kodiak followed silently. She pressed her face to the frosted window, scanning the yard. This time, all she saw was snow falling gently under the porch light. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there, watching, waiting, planning. She wrote in the journal again. Red jacket man seen. Pine sap on boots. Cigarette by Coop. We are not alone. Kodiak settled at her feet, head on his paws. Emily reached down, feeling the steady thump of his tail. She whispered, "We'll figure this out. I promise." But, as the wind moaned and the shadows pressed close against the glass, she knew the real danger was only beginning. Unseen in the darkness, a figure paused at the edge of the property, red jacket blending with the last light from the house. He watched, a slow smile curling beneath the brim of his hat, before disappearing into the endless maze of pines. The next few days passed in a blur of nervous energy. The mysterious man in the red jacket haunted Emily's thoughts. Even Sarah's once firm plans to leave Kalispell began to falter under the weight of Emily's pleas and Frank's measured reassurances. But the unease was everywhere. Sarah checked the locks twice before bed, and Frank kept his old hunting rifle within reach. At night, Emily woke to every creak and gust, heart pounding, Kodiak lying awake beside her, ears twitching at even the faintest sound. But the real turning point came one gray afternoon when Frank returned from town, snow melting in his white hair and eyes burning with determination. He laid Kodiak's metal tag on the kitchen table. "I asked around," he said, voice low. "Nobody in town knows this code. But I did some digging at the old ranger station and found something strange. Years ago, before your dad went missing, there was a field dog registry. Echo 7's number, RFD E7, shows up in some old records, always connected to restricted search and rescue files. The last place it was listed was an old warehouse by the lake. That's where your dad's team used to keep equipment for emergency searches. I think we should check it out." Sarah frowned, but Emily's pulse quickened. She looked to Kodiak, who sat upright, tail swishing against the floor, as if he understood. By early evening, the three of them, Emily, Frank, and Kodiak, were bundled into the truck, headlights slicing through a tangle of snowy forest roads. The sky pressed low, clouds tinged with purple and gray. The lake's surface was frozen solid, reflecting the ghostly light as they pulled up to a sagging, weathered warehouse set back from the shore, half swallowed by tangled brush and snow. Frank killed the engine and handed Emily a flashlight. "Stay close. Keep quiet. Whoever's been watching us might not be far." The warehouse loomed like a relic from another world, metal walls rusted and battered, windows clouded with age. Kodiak took the lead, nose to the ground, following a scent path along the battered double doors. Frank grunted as he forced one open, the hinges shrieking loud enough to make Emily wince. Inside, the cold bit straight through Emily's coat. The beam from her flashlight danced across stacks of crates, old radio equipment, coiled ropes, and battered ranger jackets left behind like the ghosts of another era. Dust hung thick in the air, swirling in their breath. It was Kodiak who found the clue. He nosed aside a fallen box, revealing a battered metal case with a faded sticker. Field Unit Echo 7. Emily's heart skipped as she snapped the latches open. Inside was a broken collar camera, the strap frayed and wires poking out like veins. Emily picked it up carefully. The lens was cracked, but the casing was marked with a familiar symbol, the same as her father's old ranger badge. Next to the camera was a stack of old field reports and a crumpled photograph. Emily smoothed it flat. It showed a team of rangers, her father at the center, smiling, with a dog at his side. Kodiak, Echo 7. Frank leaned over, his expression grim. He must have hidden this for a reason. Emily glanced at Kodiak, who sat by a wall scrawled with black charcoal. Her flashlight beam landed on a line of rough writing, scrawled in thick, frantic strokes. "Turn back, or the girl disappears." The words punched the breath from Emily's chest. Frank swore softly under his breath, shoving the box closed. "We're leaving. Now." But Kodiak refused to budge. He sniffed and scratched at the floor, tail stiff, ears pinned back. Emily followed, kneeling beside him, her hands trembling as she swept the floor. Something small and cold slid into her palm. A rusted key with a bent tip. It looked almost like an afterthought, yet she slipped it into her pocket, unsure if it meant anything at all. They hurried out, Frank locking the doors behind them. Back at the truck, Emily sat in silence, clutching the camera and photograph, her mind spinning with fear and questions. Sarah's voice rang in her head. "I told you it wasn't safe." But she couldn't let go of the idea that her father had left a trail, a breadcrumb path leading right to the heart of this mystery. As they pulled away from the warehouse, Kodiak barked sharply, staring at the dark woods behind them. Frank glanced in the rearview mirror, his jaw set. "Someone's watching," he said. "I can feel it." Back at the house, Sarah listened with growing horror as Emily recounted what they'd found. She pressed her hands to her face, shaking. "They threatened you. They said they'd make you disappear?" Her voice broke, and for a moment the fear Emily had been pushing aside crashed down around her. But Frank put a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. "That's exactly what they want, to scare us off. We can't let them win." Emily retreated to her room with the field camera, fiddling with the broken lens, her breath clouding in the cold air. Kodiak watched her, silent and alert. She traced the lines of the photograph, trying to read the expressions on the faces. Was her father sending her a message? Had he known all along that she, Not the grown-ups would have to finish what he started. The key burned cold in her pocket. Emily rolled it between her fingers, wondering where it fit. The fear that had dogged her for weeks began to shift, replaced by something new, a hard edge of resolve. If her father had trusted Echo 7, she would too. Later that night, as the snow fell in heavy curtains and the house was shrouded in silence, Emily scribbled new notes in her father's journal. Warehouse by the lake. Camera. Warning on the wall. Key. Someone watching us. What did Dad find out here? Before bed, she found Frank on the porch, watching the woods, rifle resting across his knees. She sat beside him, Kodiak at their feet. Grandpa, do you think Dad left more clues? Frank was quiet for a long moment. Your dad was the bravest man I ever knew. If he thought someone would come after you, he'd do whatever it took to keep you safe. We'll find the truth, Emily. I promise. Kodiak lifted his head, listening to the night. Somewhere in the woods, a twig snapped. Too sharp, too close to be the wind. Emily felt Kodiak's tension and shivered, but she stayed close to her grandfather, heart pounding, waiting for the dawn. For the first time since her father disappeared, she knew she wasn't just a scared kid anymore. She was a part of this story now, for better or worse. And she wouldn't let the shadows win. The wind roared through the pines that night, rattling the windows and piling drifts against the house. Sleep came in short, restless bursts for Emily. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the warehouse, the warning on the wall, the broken camera, and her father's smile frozen in an old photograph. Morning came gray and bitter, the sky heavy with new snow. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. At breakfast, Sarah was the first to speak, her voice sharp and urgent. That's it. We're leaving today. She was already stuffing clothes into a suitcase, hands shaking. We don't know who's out there or what they want, but I'm not risking your life, Emily. Not after what happened to your dad. Emily's mouth opened in protest, but Frank was quicker. Sarah, if we run now, we might never find out what happened. The truth is right here. Somewhere close. Emily's father would have wanted us to see this through, but Sarah was past reason. You want us to stay and wait for them to come after her? Her eyes were red with fear and sleeplessness. Is that what you want, Dad? Frank set his mug down, jaw clenched. I want justice for my son and safety for my granddaughter. Those aren't opposites. The argument swelled, voices bouncing off the walls. Emily, feeling powerless, sat at the table tracing circles in the condensation on her juice glass. Kodiak was restless, padding back and forth between the door and Emily's chair, picking up on the tension in the room. He whined, then pressed his head against Emily's arm as if reminding her that he was there, that he wasn't going anywhere. The standoff was broken by the ring of Frank's phone. He answered with a gruff, "Hello?" and listened, his eyes growing narrow. "You'd better come see this," he said, finally, holding the phone out for Emily and Sarah. On the tiny screen, a photo appeared, a torn, faded picture, emailed from an old ranger friend. It showed 3 men standing in a line. Emily's father, looking younger and more confident, flanked by 2 others. To his right was a tall, thin man in a suit, Clyde Mathers, the town's former mayor, and in front of all 3, almost as an afterthought, sat a large German shepherd, Kodiak. On the back of the photo, written in shaky script, Clyde, RJ, and Echo 7, summer 2012. Frank stared at the image, then exhaled slowly. I'd heard rumors about Clyde and those logging deals in the preserve, but I never believed. Sarah cut in, voice brittle. What do you mean, logging deals? Frank lowered his head, rubbing his temples. Your dad was investigating illegal logging in the protected part of the forest. He told me some people in power didn't want the story getting out. Clyde was the mayor, and he was connected to some, let's say, shady business. When your dad started poking around, things got tense. Equipment went missing. His truck got sabotaged. He started taking Echo 7, Kodiak, everywhere, even on his days off. Emily's breath caught. She looked at the dog, remembering her father's words in the journal. If anything happens to me, Echo knows. Sarah's face was pale. We need to go, she repeated, but this time there was less conviction. Her eyes darted to the window, to the woods that seemed to press closer each day. Frank looked at Emily. It's your call, kiddo. If you want to go, we'll go. But if you want to finish what your dad started, we stay and fight. Emily stared at the photograph, at her father's familiar smile, at the loyal dog who now sat by her feet. Fear twisted inside her, but she shook her head. I want to know the truth, she whispered. I want to help Dad. Even if he's gone, I want to finish what he started. The decision seemed to settle over the room like a fragile peace. Sarah hugged Emily tightly, fighting tears. We stay. But the second I think you're in danger, we're gone. No more arguing. That night, as Sarah began to calm and Frank busied himself cleaning his old rifle, Emily sat cross-legged on the floor with Kodiak. She dug through her father's journal again, trying to decode the clues, maps with circles, numbers she didn't understand, and scribbled notes about the big meeting and the stash by the riverbank. Kodiak watched her intently, his head cocked as if remembering something important. Inspired, Emily began to bring out her father's old belongings, a faded ranger jacket, a battered ranger hat, and an old heavy flashlight. She laid them on the floor beside Kodiak. The dog sniffed each item in turn, his tail wagging at the hat, his nose twitching at the jacket. But it was the flashlight that changed everything. The moment Emily switched it on, Kodiak's ears perked and he jumped up, tail high, barking once, a sharp, insistent sound. Then he bolted for the back door, pausing only to glance over his shoulder as if saying, "Follow me." Frank and Sarah came running at the noise, but Emily didn't wait. She pulled on her boots and coat and raced after Kodiak into the yard, flashlight swinging. The dog led her to the edge of the forest, to a spot where the snow was piled high against a massive tree stump. Kodiak began to dig, flinging snow with his front paws. Emily knelt to help, her hands quickly going numb. Just beneath the roots, she felt her fingers close on something cold and hard, a battered tin box wedged between the wood and earth. Emily pried it free, brushing off the dirt and snow. Frank arrived, breathing hard, with Sarah just behind him. Emily lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in a greasy cloth, was a USB drive and a folded slip of paper. The paper read, "If found, give to Frank Harris." Her grandfather took it, hands shaking, and read it aloud. The USB felt heavy in Emily's hand, as if it contained the truth itself. Back inside, Frank plugged it into his old laptop. The screen flickered, then filled with video, grainy, but clear. The camera panned over Clyde Mathers standing with two burly men near a stack of illegal logs. Emily's father's voice, shaky but strong, could be heard confronting Clyde, who threatened him in harsh, unmistakable tones. Emily felt her heart pounding, tears stinging her eyes. "We have proof," she said, barely above a whisper. Sarah gasped, staring at the screen in shock. This could bring Clyde down. But in that moment of hope, Kodiak growled, a low, warning sound, and all three turned to the window. Shadows flickered at the edge of the yard. The pines seemed to lean in, hiding secrets, and Emily realized the fight was far from over. Still, as Kodiak pressed against her leg and the video continued to play, she felt for the first time that maybe, just maybe, they could win. The morning after discovering the video evidence, Emily barely slept. Her dreams spun in loops, her father's voice, Clyde's threats, Kodiak digging at the forest's edge, leaving her wide-eyed and restless. When the first gray light crept through her window, she found Kodiak already waiting, alert but calm, his nose pressed against the chilly glass as if he, too, was on the lookout for answers. Downstairs, the house hummed with a different kind of energy. Sarah made coffee on autopilot, her eyes darting to the laptop where the USB still rested, almost sacred. Frank, normally slow to rise, was up early, making calls to a trusted friend in the sheriff's office. He spoke in low, urgent tones, relaying what they'd found while keeping one eye on the front yard. Emily, feeling too wired to eat, wandered back to her room. The old ranger jacket, hat, and flashlight were still laid out from the night before, each carrying a trace of her father, his scent, his sweat, his courage. Kodiak followed her, sitting with the patience of a sentry. It struck Emily that the dog might remember more than anyone realized. She pulled her father's jacket over her shoulders, then clipped the battered ranger hat onto her head. Kodiak's ears shot up and his eyes tracked her every move. She lifted the heavy flashlight, flicked it on and off, watching Kodiak's reaction. His tail thumped, then he rose, nose twitching with excitement. Emily knelt, holding out the flashlight. "Do you remember this boy?" she whispered, her heart pounding. Kodiak nosed the flashlight, then suddenly turned and trotted purposefully toward the back door, stopping only to glance over his shoulder as if to say, "Hurry." Emily grabbed her boots, slipped into her coat, and followed, her breath quick and foggy in the morning chill. Sarah and Frank, deep in conversation, barely noticed her slip outside. Kodiak moved with purpose, paws skimming across crusted snow toward the line of pines that marked the edge of the property. Emily followed close, heart hammering with both hope and fear. As they neared the spot where the woods thickened, Kodiak circled a fallen tree, tail wagging. He began to dig at the base, paws sending clumps of snow and earth flying. Emily dropped to her knees, helping with bare hands, the cold biting her skin. Beneath a root, her fingers hit something hard, a metal tin, battered and nearly invisible against the dirt. She pulled it out, breath clouding in the air, and popped the lid. Inside was another USB drive, carefully wrapped in plastic, and a faded photograph of her father and Echo 7. Kodiak, standing in front of the old ranger cabin, both looking proud and strong. Tears sprang to Emily's eyes. She clutched the photo to her chest, glancing at Kodiak, who wagged his tail as if pleased. "Good boy," she choked out, hugging him tightly. Back inside, Frank loaded the new USB onto his laptop. The screen flickered, showing video footage, shaky but clear, of Clyde Mathers and two other men deep in the woods, stacking illegal logs. Emily's father confronted them, the audio crackling, but his words clear. "This is Townland. You can't just steal from everyone." Clyde's reply was chilling. "If you know what's good for your family, you'll forget you saw anything." There was a scuffle, the camera falling, and then blackness. Sarah watched, hands trembling, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He tried to warn us? And they threatened him?" Frank wrapped his arm around her. "We've got the evidence now. This will make them answer for everything." As the gravity of the discovery sank in, Kodiak began to pace by the door, ears pricked, tail stiff. He let out a single sharp bark, then stared at Emily and Frank expectantly. "What is it, boy?" Frank asked, grabbing his coat and rifle. Emily followed Kodiak outside, nerves stretched taut. He led them not to the yard, but along a narrow trail through the trees, a path Emily recognized from her father's hand-drawn maps in the journal. Branches snagged at their coats, snow crunching beneath their feet as they moved deeper into the woods. At a weathered stump near the forest's edge, Kodiak stopped, sniffing intently, then began to dig again. Emily helped, her hands numb, until she hit something, a shallowly buried tin box. Frank pried it open to reveal a map, a small notebook, and another photograph. This one even older, showing a group of rangers in front of the very warehouse they'd visited, all with dogs at their sides. On the back was scrawled, "If I disappear, the truth is buried where the light breaks through." Emily turned the map over, recognizing a clearing drawn near the old ranger cabin. The place where the sun hits first. Her father had called it once. The phrase echoed in her mind. Where the light breaks through. Frank squinted at the notebook, reading aloud entries written in hurried script. Clyde meeting with unknown men. Threats made. Echo 7 picked up strange scent by the river. Evidence hidden in case by the stump. Tell Emily, trust Echo, he'll lead you home. Sarah, standing at the kitchen window, watched as the trio returned with their new clues. Emily burst through the door, voice shaking with excitement. Dad hid more than just video. There are maps, notes, proof he was closing in on them. He wanted us to finish what he started. Sarah hugged her fiercely, finally letting the tears flow. "You're so brave," she whispered. "Just like your father." That night, as the wind howled outside. Emily lay in bed with the ranger hat pulled low, the old flashlight under her pillow, and Kodiak at her feet. For the first time since her father vanished, she didn't feel helpless. She felt like she was part of his story, part of something bigger. The fear was still there, but now it was joined by determination, by love, by the sense that together, with her family and with Kodiak, she could face whatever waited in the darkness. In the shadows beyond the house, someone watched the lights go out, his breath fogging in the cold. The game was changing, and the Harris family was no longer running scared. The next morning, the sky threatened snow, thick gray clouds roiling over the mountains. There was a heaviness in the air that made Emily's skin prickle with nerves. Frank called the sheriff, arranging to meet him with the USBs and all their evidence that afternoon at the station. Sarah packed a small go-bag, just in case. Emily kept close to Kodiak, not letting him out of her sight, feeling that any moment could bring another twist. The wind began to howl around noon, the first flakes swirling as the temperature dropped. Frank loaded the truck with the evidence and double-checked the locks. "We'll stick together," he promised, "and stay alert." Even Sarah agreed, tension softening in her eyes as she hugged Emily close. But by mid-afternoon, the storm had truly arrived. The snow came thick and fast, erasing all tracks, blurring the world into shifting whites and grays. Frank, Sarah, and Emily huddled by the window, waiting for the sheriff's headlights to appear at the end of their long, pine-lined drive. That's when Kodiak stiffened at the back door, a deep, rumbling growl rising in his chest. Emily's heart hammered. "What is it, boy?" she whispered, her fingers twisting in his fur. Sarah peered through the curtains. "There, by the woods," she gasped. A figure moved at the edge of the trees, a flash of red in the blizzard, then another shape behind. Two men, pushing through the snow, faces shadowed beneath hoods. Frank's expression hardened as he reached for the rifle. "Stay inside. Call 911 now," he ordered, voice steady and quiet. But as Sarah dialed, the line crackled and died. The storm had downed the power lines. No cell service, no landline, nothing. Panic gripped Emily, but Kodiak pressed against her leg, eyes locked on the door. A heavy thud hit the porch. The doorknob rattled. Frank raised the rifle. "Back!" he barked. "We're armed!" But a crash of splintering wood echoed through the house. The back door was kicked in, snow and wind roaring through the kitchen. Two masked men burst inside. One lunged at Frank, shoving him to the floor. The other grabbed Sarah, trying to pin her arms. Emily screamed, backing toward the hallway. Kodiak snarled and launched himself at the intruder, jaws clamping down on his arm. The man howled in pain, swinging wildly, but Kodiak held fast. "Get the girl!" someone shouted. Emily darted down the hall, heart thundering, clutching the old flashlight. She heard Kodiak's furious barking, the scuffle of boots, Frank cursing. She dove through her bedroom door, slamming it shut and throwing her weight against it. For a moment, silence, except the howling wind. But footsteps pounded down the hall. A heavy fist smashed the door open. Emily scrambled away, clutching the flashlight like a weapon. "Stay away!" she shouted. The red jacket man stepped in, face bare and furious now. Clyde Mathers himself, eyes wild, cheeks red from cold and anger. "Give me the drive, Emily. You don't know what you're doing." Emily's breath came in gasps. "My father tried to stop you. He trusted Kodiak, and so do I." Clyde sneered. "Your father was a fool. You can't prove anything, unless you want to disappear like he did." But behind Clyde, Kodiak hurled himself through the shattered doorway, teeth bared. He crashed into Clyde's legs, knocking him sideways. Emily seized her chance, scrambling out and racing down the hall. She could hear Sarah yelling, Frank struggling in the kitchen. She bolted for the back door. The storm slammed into her, wind and snow biting at her face. Kodiak was at her side in seconds, limping but determined. Emily ran toward the woods, toward the old ranger cabin her father used to visit, the one she'd marked on the map. Branches whipped her face. Her boots slipped in the drifts. Behind her, the men shouted, their flashlights swinging wildly through the storm. Emily reached the cabin, heart pounding, lungs burning. She yanked open the creaky door and ducked inside, Kodiak right behind her. The cabin was cold, dark, and smelled of pine and old ash. She fumbled with her father's flashlight, clicking it on and pointing it through the snow-glazed windows. Outside, voices echoed, angry, close. Emily's hands shook as she pointed the beam skyward, the old ranger signal her father had taught her. 3 quick flashes, then a long one, again and again. "Help me, Dad," she whispered. "Send someone, please." Clyde's shadow passed by the window, flashlight sweeping the dark. "Come out, Emily," he shouted, frustration and fear twisting his voice. "It's over," Kodiak growled, planting himself between Emily and the door, blood trailing from his flank, but eyes fierce and clear. Emily crawled into a corner, clutching the USB and flashlight, heart racing so loud she thought it would give her away. Thunder boomed in the distance. The storm raged harder, snow stacking high against the cabin walls. Emily listened, trying to sort every sound, the roar of wind, her own breathing, Kodiak's low warning rumbles. Then, from deep in the woods, she heard something new. A wolf's howl, long and piercing. Except it wasn't a wolf. It was Kodiak, his voice rising, desperate and wild, echoing through the trees. It was the sound her father had described, a call for help, the ranger's signal. Suddenly, a chorus of voices called Emily's name, Frank, and then a sheriff's deputy. The search party had seen her flashlight and heard the howl, braving the storm to reach the cabin. Flashlights flickered through the trees, and Clyde's men, realizing they were surrounded, vanished into the blizzard. The cabin door burst open. Frank rushed in, rifle raised, sheriff at his side. "Emily! Kodiak! Are you all right?" Emily sobbed, hugging Kodiak tightly. "He saved me! He really saved me!" Sarah appeared behind Frank, tears streaming down her cheeks. The sheriff knelt beside Kodiak, whistling in admiration. "That's one brave dog you've got," he said. "Looks like you've both got a story to tell." Outside, the storm finally began to break. Sirens sounded from down the road, the deputies rounding up Clyde and his men as they tried to flee. Frank wrapped Emily in his arms. Kodiak, battered but alive, pressed close, tail wagging. And in the quiet that followed, Emily realized she wasn't just a scared little girl anymore. She was her father's daughter, brave and true, with a loyal friend by her side. By morning, the blizzard had finally passed, leaving Kalispell covered in a thick, shining blanket of snow that sparkled beneath a pale winter sun. The town had never looked so peaceful, but inside the Harris home, the atmosphere buzzed with tension and hope. Sirens still echoed faintly in the distance, a reminder that everything had changed during the storm. Sheriff Wallace and his deputies worked quickly. Clyde Mathers and his 2 hired men were taken into custody, their red jackets and muddy boots now damning evidence rather than a warning. As the news spread, Kalispell buzzed with rumors about the break-in, the rescue, and the secrets that had long haunted the edge of town. Neighbors gathered in clusters at the end of snowy driveways, talking in hushed voices, casting uneasy glances toward the Harris property. Inside, the kitchen had been transformed into a kind of command center. The USB drives were in Sheriff Wallace's hands now, safely copied and cataloged. Emily, still shaken but resolute, sat at the table beside Frank and Sarah. Kodiak lay at her feet, bandaged but resting comfortably, every so often thumping his tail when someone glanced his way. Wallace offered a reassuring smile as he scrolled through the video files once more. "These are more than enough, Emily. It's all here, illegal logging, threats, the confession. Your father was brave, and so are you." Frank, face lined with pride and relief, squeezed Emily's shoulder. "Your dad would have been proud, kiddo. You finished what he started." Sarah wiped her eyes. "We all did, and we're never leaving again." The town's reaction was immediate. That afternoon, the sheriff's office called an emergency meeting at the town hall. Word traveled fast. By dusk, nearly everyone in Kalispell had packed into the old auditorium. Frank carried Kodiak on his makeshift stretcher, refusing to leave him home alone, while Sarah held Emily's hand tightly as they entered. The room was filled with anxious energy. Reporters scribbled notes, townsfolk whispered, and a few wore old ranger uniforms in quiet solidarity. On stage, Sheriff Wallace stood beside a projector, the screen glowing with the first image from the video evidence. Clyde Mathers, red-jacketed and cornered, caught in the act. The sheriff's voice rang clear over the crowd. This town owes a debt to the Harris family and their loyal dog. Their courage brought to light a crime that has haunted our forests and threatened our community. Today, justice begins. As the footage played, the threats, the confrontation, the proof of illegal logging and the link to Clyde, gasps echoed around the room. Some wept openly, others stared in disbelief. When Emily's father's voice rang out, proud and unwavering, even the hardest hearts seemed to soften. Clyde, handcuffed and pale, refused to look up as the truth was laid bare for all to see. His accomplices were also present, flanked by deputies. Their faces, once filled with smug confidence, now reflected only defeat. At the close of the meeting, Sheriff Wallace invited Emily and Frank to the stage. The crowd fell silent as they stepped forward, Kodiak limping along at Emily's side. Wallace pinned a small, shining badge to Kodiak's collar. Loyal witness, it read in neat engraving. This dog did what no one else could. He kept faith with his partner and with this family, Wallace announced, voice thick with emotion. Kodiak is not just a hero. He is a symbol of everything good we strive for: loyalty, courage, and never giving up. The auditorium erupted into applause. People rose to their feet, clapping and cheering, some even wiping tears from their eyes. Frank beamed, tears glistening on his cheeks. Sarah hugged Emily fiercely. For the first time since her father disappeared, Emily felt seen. Not just as the little girl who lost her dad, but as the girl who found her voice and brought justice to her town. After the ceremony, people lined up to shake Emily's hand, to thank Frank, and to pet Kodiak. Kids pressed close to the stage, eyes wide with admiration. Emily knelt down so Kodiak could greet them, the dog's tail wagging as hands reached out, hesitant at first and then bold. One little boy, clutching a worn library book, looked up at Emily. "Is Kodiak really a hero?" he whispered. Emily smiled. "He's the bravest friend I've ever had." Late that night, as the house finally grew quiet and the stars blinked coldly outside, Emily found Sarah in the living room, staring at the last photo of her father and Echo 7. Sarah turned, eyes soft. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I wanted to run from the past to keep you safe. But your father, he always believed in facing the truth. You were right to follow your heart." Emily hugged her mother tightly, tears finally breaking free. "I just wanted to make him proud. I wanted us to be a family again." Frank joined them, Kodiak ambling over and dropping his head into Emily's lap. They sat together, silent, the weight of the last week settling over them, not as grief, but as something brighter. It was a sense of belonging, of justice, of the kind of love that endures storms and secrets and even loss. The next day, as the sun rose over a peaceful Kalispell, the sheriff stopped by with more news. "Clyde's already confessed," he told the family, relief written across his face. "The evidence was overwhelming, and the town has voted to name a new trail in your father's honor. We'll never forget what he did." Emily smiled through happy tears, glancing at Kodiak. He wouldn't have done it alone. Later, at a small-town gathering, Emily stood before the community and spoke, her voice steady, strong. "My dad always told me that some memories don't fade. They bark, they guard, and they guide you home. I think that's what Kodiak did for all of us." The crowd cheered again, and as Emily knelt to hug Kodiak, she knew that, finally, the Pines had given up their secrets, and home was no longer just a place. It was a promise, carried forward by courage, loyalty, and love. The snow lingered for weeks after justice returned to Kalispell, blanketing the forest and the little town in a peace that felt hard-won, almost sacred. Each morning, the sunlight found its way through the thick canopy, sending golden rays through the frost-laced pines. It was in those early hours, with the hush of the world all around, that Emily Harris felt closest to her father, and to the story she now carried forward. A month had passed since the town meeting, and the rhythms of daily life had begun to return. But everything was different. There was a new sense of hope running through the house and through Emily's heart. Sarah smiled more easily, and Frank, though still grieving, whistled as he worked. Kodiak, brave, loyal, his wounds healing, had become a local legend, the dog that brought a family and a whole community back from the edge. One Saturday morning, Emily woke to the sound of Kodiak's tail thumping at her door. She grinned, pulling on her boots and jacket. "Ready for an adventure?" she whispered, ruffling his fur. Together, they slipped out, following the familiar path through the backyard and into the woods. The snow crunched beneath their feet, and the air was sharp and clean. Every tree, every scent, every turn in the trail felt filled with new meaning. They climbed the ridge where Emily's father used to take her, his thinking spot, he'd called it, where the whole valley unfurled below and the pines seemed to speak in whispers. Kodiak walked by her side, calm and proud, stopping now and then to sniff a branch or nuzzle her gloved hand. When they reached the top, Emily paused, drawing in a deep breath of cold, pine-scented air. She looked out over the forest, the same forest that had nearly stolen her father, but had also given her the courage to find him again, in memories, in love, and in the truth she'd helped reveal. Kodiak sat beside her, gaze steady, his breath puffing in white clouds. Emily closed her eyes, letting the quiet wrap around her. She thought of all the lessons the pines had whispered, that strength was not the absence of fear, but the choice to face it, that the past could hurt, but it could also heal, that loyalty and courage were sometimes the greatest magic of all. She felt her father's presence then, not as a ghost or a shadow, but as a steady warmth in her heart, a voice that told her she was never alone. She whispered into the wind, "Thank you, Dad, for everything." Kodiak pressed closer, as if he understood, and the two of them stood there for a long time, watching the world awaken beneath the rising sun. In the weeks that followed, Kodiak's fame spread beyond Kalispell. The local librarian, Mrs. Waller, invited Emily and Kodiak to visit the town library. "We're starting a new program for kids who struggle with reading," she explained. "Would you and Kodiak like to help?" The first Saturday, Emily arrived at the library nervous but excited. She found a circle of children gathered on the rug, all holding books, some fidgeting and shy. Kodiak settled into the center, tail wagging gently. Emily sat beside him, reading aloud from her favorite story, a tale about a brave explorer and his loyal dog. One by one, the children took turns reading, voices shaky at first, then growing stronger as Kodiak listened, patient and attentive. Whenever a child stumbled, Kodiak would nudge closer or wag his tail, offering comfort without words. Week by week, more children joined. Parents and teachers came to watch, some wiping away tears at the sight of shy readers blossoming with confidence. "Kodiak is a hero," one little girl whispered, hugging his neck. But Emily knew it wasn't just about heroism. It was about healing, hers, her mother's, and the town's. Kodiak's gentle presence turned fear into friendship, loneliness into laughter, and loss into hope. She realized that the lessons her father had taught her about nature, about justice, about kindness, were living on, not just in her, but in every person touched by their story. One sunny afternoon, the town gathered to dedicate the new trail carved through the heart of the forest to Ranger Daniel Harris. The mayor unveiled the sign, "Harris Memorial Trail for those who guard, guide, and remember." Emily, Frank, Sarah, and Kodiak stood together, surrounded by friends and neighbors. As the ribbon was cut, cheers rose up, echoing through the trees. Emily spoke briefly to the crowd, her words steady and clear. "My father believed that some memories never fade. They bark, they guard, they guide you home. We followed the truth, and it led us right here, together." The pines seemed to whisper their agreement, branches swaying gently as if in applause. Kodiak barked once, sharp and joyful, and the children laughed, running ahead down the new trail. That evening, back at home, Emily and Sarah sat by the fireplace, Frank dozing in his chair, Kodiak curled at their feet. Sarah reached for Emily's hand. "You changed this town, honey. Your father would be so proud." Emily smiled, feeling the weight of all they'd been through. Loss and fear, yes, but also love and resilience. She looked down at Kodiak, who gazed back with quiet wisdom. "He'd be proud of you too, Mom, of all of us, and especially of Kodiak." Outside, the wind rustled through the pines, carrying their story out into the world, a story of bravery, of healing, of never giving up on the ones you love. As the fire crackled and the stars glimmered above the snowy trees, Emily turned to the camera her mother held and spoke for everyone who'd followed their journey. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. We hope you remember Kodiak's courage, my father's legacy, and the magic that happens when you trust in loyalty, hope, and the voice of the pines. Because some heroes wear badges and some just wear fur. Kodiak lifted his head, barked softly, and Emily laughed, her heart full. The forest outside seemed to echo back, guarding, guiding, and always speaking for those willing to listen.